good morning. It is a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. Welcome to SciChat Saturday. And it is a lovely February 25th. Good morning from wherever you are. Good afternoon if you're in other parts of the world, of course. Um, apologize if I look somewhat like I'm glowing, somewhat angelic here. That is not entirely intended. Turns out it's a funny story, maybe for another time, but I actually broke the light in the ceiling. Otherwise, I would be much better lit than I am right now. So yeah, we are here. We are going to be having fun with this. If you're watching us on the replay, thank you. Some housekeeping notes actually before we get started on this. I will be traveling a fair chunk of March, so it will be difficult for me to be doing a whole lot of content. So I'm not sure we'll do a live SciChat Saturday next month or not because of that. But I will be thrilled to hopefully bring it back in April, and I've got my eye on a couple of guests also that should be very good. Let's see. And let's see with that. So while I'm on travel, of course, I'll be providing some pre-recorded content for everybody to watch on that front. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Here with that, but I will be on travel for a fair chunk of March. But now then, with all that in mind, today I obviously don't have a guest, but I have something that crossed my radar quite recently, and it comes to us from the National Academies of Science, or sciences, depending on how you want to phrase it, in the United States, which decided to issue an interesting, if not strange, report outright um, on advancing anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM with two M's organizations, broadening participation 2023. So this full report was actually sent to me by a couple folks I know, so I thank you for that. But before we get started, I think it's actually pretty much a good idea for those of us who are unfamiliar to actually take a look at what the National Academies of Sciences actually are. For those who are unfamiliar. So, the National Academies of Sciences here, and I may check one thing real quick. Yeah, okay, still doing good. I was having some technical glitches with the internet connection too, so pardon me. Oh, and there it is. Hey, you see the report come up right away. So, the National Academies of Sciences are somewhat prestigious. They're a nonprofit specifically for the United States. And have a lot of prestige to them. They publish particular journals. They publish journals such as the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which, if you were paying attention to videos the last couple of weeks for me, one of the ones they published recently was an article claiming that systemic racism has had negative adverse effects on the genetic diversity and demographics of urban wildlife. Not really what the article actually says. I think the conclusions are flawed. And I don't know how that made it past peer review, but anyway, no, well, kind of do, but so here's the thing is that it's a private nonprofit. It's about sciences, engineering, and medicine. So that's when we get into STEM. We're talking about what science, technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine is the last M that gets added now. If you're seeing STEM with two M's involved here. So its job is to provide independent, objective advice to inform policy with evidence, spark progress and innovation, and confront challenging issues for the benefit of society. So I question the objective part of this for sure. I absolutely question that. But there is certainly a lot in here to talk about. Wow, that's an interesting bunch of history in there that just get thrown into it. So it actually throws you over to the archives instead of actually giving you a thing of the history. That's fascinating. All right, hold on. Yeah. So yeah, talking about something that was founded in 1861 really. And the job here was to provide a lot of guidance for policymaking in particular, and to be objective and evidence based about it and what have you. Strayed a fair bit, I think, from its founding. One of the things that, if I recall correctly, the National Academy of Sciences does is an award for each of those. They do give some very prestigious, I say that in quotes, awards for different things that they are doing here, and for different members who are supposedly doing amazing things in sciences, which we'll say a lot of them are. And of course, like so many other organizations, they of course have their own statement on diversity and inclusion, which has been added in all of this kind of mess. National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine value diversity in our members, volunteers, and staff, and strive for a culture of inclusion in our workplace and activities. Convening a diverse community to exchange ideas and perspectives enhances the quality of our work and increases our relevance as advisors to the nation about the most complex issues facing the nation and world. To promote diversity and inclusion in the sciences, engineering, and medicine, we are committed to increasing the diversity of National Academy staff members, and volunteers to reflect the populations we serve. We pledge to cultivate an environment and culture that promotes inclusion and values respectful participation of all individuals who help advance the mission of the institution. So, there you go. National Academies of Sciences, right? Intent is on causing all sorts of crazy fun things that way. But what did they publish recently? Well, as of February 14th, this press release came out from the National Academies. Higher ed institutions, STEM organizations should act to change cultures to support inclusive excellence and dismantle barriers created by systemic racism and implicit bias. Hooray, right? So yeah, like I said, I do have the full report, and a little bit we'll switch to that, but I figure it's worth it to say a little something for what's summarized here at the beginning of this particular press release with the National Academies. So let's see. To increase diversity, equity, inclusion in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine, as I said, we add medicine to the end of this thing, which I don't know if y'all have seen the oh goodness, what was it? It was this swearing ceremony for the Columbia med school students that had all that woke gobbledygook in it. Yeah, that's not medicine. That's the only oath you're really supposed to take is a Hippocratic oath. Do no harm. Anyway, higher education institutions and STEM organizations. STEM organizations, what they're referring to is the professional societies associated with STEM. So think of your American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. Think of the American Geophysical Union, the American Association of Geographers, the American Medical Association, all those kinds of associations. That's what they're referring to in terms of STEM organizations here. Should go beyond a focus on simply increasing the numeric participation of minoritized racial and ethnic groups and act to change their organizational cultures and environments. Removing barriers to entry and participation while also implementing practices that convey belonging. Belonging. Whatever the heck that is. If you recall, I did a video a while back. Belonging doesn't have a great definition even in psychology. As far as I know. So yeah, I would point that one out for sure. Will allow organizations to move from broadening participation by the numbers to fostering a culture of inclusion, thriving, and success, the report says. Organizations should take active, intentional steps to dismantle policies, practices, and cultures that confer power and privilege to white people over others. Get the implicit assumption there as terms of what's going on and what's happening and all this kind of jazz. Hey, there we go again, right? Got to put those particular things in there many times over. Hang on real quick. There's one thing I forgot to do. I just wanted to do this real quick before I totally forget. Okay. So, this is certainly an interesting assumption that is made here. So, let's see. Quote, the concepts of anti racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion are not goals for which a simple checklist will indicate success, said Gilda Barabino, president of Olin College of Engineering and professor of biomedical and chemical engineering and co chair of the committee that wrote the report. Quote, rather, the goal is to create environments that focus on inclusive excellence where all participants have access to educational and professional opportunities, feel included, and have the resources to actualize their full potential. STEM organizations will require ongoing leadership resources and commitment to ensure that these values become an intentionally maintained organizational culture. So, dictating values in an organization, right? You would hope one of those values would be truth seeking, but I kind of doubt that. The report recommends that organizations follow a multi-tiered approach at the leadership, team, and individual levels and identifies policies and practices that can be implemented at each level. Oh boy. So let's see. What do they recommend in this thing here that people do? The report recommends that organizations implement changes to policies and practices at the individual, team, and organization levels. Gatekeepers, individuals in institutions or organizations who are in a position to permit or prevent access to resources, play an important role in determining who is or who is not included in STEM by defining the skills, identities, and values necessary for individuals to persevere in these fields. Research indicates that most often in STEM, non-white Hispanic males occupy the gatekeeper role. So, like other people, gatekeepers often have attitudinal biases, cognitive mechanisms, and social motives that keep the whites. Wow, I'm going to tell you, I haven't read all this thing. But white status quo intact, the report says. Racial bias is not only more automatic, but also ambivalent and ambiguous than most people think. This means that individuals, including gatekeepers, may not be able to monitor their own bias impartially and may unwittingly perpetuate it. Do you catch what the assumption is in this? That it's an automatic assumption that people are doing this. It's also white status quo. Since when is the status quo tied to any racial group? But anyway, the report recommends generating systems of accountability that can help identify behavioral patterns of individual gatekeepers. For example, the leaders of STEM organizations and human resources directors can create organization level or unit level information systems to collect data on the decisions of gatekeepers related to hiring, admissions, promotion, tenure, advancement, and awards, and other factors. Data should be examined to identify patterns of bias exhibited by gatekeepers based on race and ethnicity. Okay. I feel like that's actually pushing toward quotas here or something along that line, which is a little more than a little creepy. That is more than a little fucking creepy right there, I think. Yeah. And the thing is here, this has been pointed out elsewhere. The notions of implicit bias, like the implicit bias tests, have no predictive power when it comes to behavior. And there's a couple of reasons for that, because even others have pointed out that there's like 200 at least different cognitive biases in the human brain. And one thing they haven't figured out how to do yet is figure out which one is acting in a given moment when somebody is exhibiting a particular behavior. They can't possibly do that. They can't possibly figure that out. And I don't think they're going to figure it out this way either. The other thing is just like, and on the one hand, if you're talking about science roles, wouldn't you necessarily want people who are dedicated to pursuing the truth and have a good background and understanding of the research that they're doing, regardless of whatever race they are? So yeah, okay. Most science today relies on scientists training or working together in teams of varying sizes. Now, I will say this is actually somewhat of a true statement because a lot of research nowadays has gotten to be very interdisciplinary in here involved. So, yeah, I would not be surprised. While the common narrative is that diverse teams perform better, simply having numerically diverse team. Now, diverse, the thing about this is with diverse, they do not mean diverse thought necessarily here with this. They do not mean that. Here, they quite frankly probably mean just different based on whatever race, sex, gender orientation, all this other stuff that you are. Numerous challenges can threaten performance, including anxiety about working with people from other racial or ethnic groups and prevalent mistreatment targeting minoritized individuals. Okay, let me go back to this. It's like early on in this channel's history, I actually covered a bunch of the research, um, on whether or not some of these DEI things were actually effective. Um, and one of the things that was a consistent throughput, if you were looking at studies that don't, if you're looking at studies that actually look at outcomes and actual measurable things rather than the subjective thing of whether or not people liked the training or thought it was useful. Because if you're looking at whether or not people liked the training or thought it was useful, I'm sure you can get a bunch of people to say yes. But if you're looking at the research for whether or not it actually improves situations, you get more representation from different groups, or people feel more comfortable about working with each other and what have you. The problem is that's not what happened. That is most definitely not what happened. And most of the research that actually focuses on whether or not things are effective at their stated goals and getting more people to work together and getting more folks involved, they tend not to work, and they tend to actually make people less likely to want to work with each other, which is the opposite of what they want. Let's see. Conditions that foster inclusion are essential. So maybe we should get rid of those DEI things that don't. Anyway, gatekeepers who manage teams, such as principal investigators and heads of research groups, should be intentional about creating team norms that centralize a positive climate in which all members, including minoritized individuals, are supported, heard, and respected. They should develop interdependent teams, rather, in which everyone is cooperating and working toward an established common goal. They should ensure team members feel psychologically safe on the team and work to promote status among team members. That would seem to suggest that the DEI stuff that seems to be the most prominent in the world probably shouldn't be used, considering that it tends to do the opposite. I don't have the immediate link to the video, but I talked about this on my own channel sometime previously. It's actually pretty early on in this channel's history. That was one of the things I covered. Is diversity training effective? Spoiler alert, it's not, according to the research. So yeah, we're gonna get into that. So maybe dropping those things, since they tend not to work. Anyway, organizational and leadership level leaders, notably those at the very top of organizations, such as presidents and chief executive officers, have the unique opportunity to shape organizational culture and climate. To make large-scale change, leaders need to set an agenda that addresses the organization at multiple levels, including gatekeepers, leaders, mid-level management, and administration, and the appropriate resources in terms of person hours and funds. Leaders should review evaluation criteria and decision-making practices. Wow. Shows I'm not entirely awake this morning. At critical points of access and advancement, such as in admissions, hiring and wages, startup, resource setting, and promotion, and take action to redress both individual bias and discrimination and organizational processes that reduce harm and negative outcomes for people from minorities, racial, and ethnic groups. For example, oh boy. Admissions offices at the undergraduate and graduate levels should assess the alignment or divergence between the current admissions policies and the criteria and values of Okay. So how much does it line up? Current admissions policies, alignment or divergence between the current admissions policies and the criteria and values of anti-racism, diversity, and equity inclusion. Yeah, if it's all at Ibram Kendi, I don't think we necessarily want that. here because that tends to be really bad. They should develop holistic admission strategies that offer a systematic, contextualized evaluation of applicants on multiple dimensions. I'm going to take a wager. I hesitate to say this because there's obviously not anything here that would suggest what it is. Multiple dimensions here. Does any of that include? I would hope that it all includes merit, but what does that include? What are those multiple dimensions? Hiring managers, directors of human resources, and supervisors should measure and review the application offer and acceptance rates in their organization, as well as the salaries, resources, packages, and academic tracks and titles for new hires for instances of racial and ethnic discrimination in hiring. These leaders should implement, as appropriate, proactive outreach and recruitment to increase applications from people from minoritized racial and ethnic groups, training and resources to eliminate bias in the hiring process for managers, and updated policies to reduce bias and discrimination in setting wages. Updated policies to reduce bias and discrimination in setting wages. It's like it's an implicit assumption that there is that. That's an implicit assumption right there. Directors of human resources and supervisors should measure, evaluate, and address the presence of bias and discrimination in rewards and promotion. The proportion of people from historically minoritized backgrounds leaving their positions and the reasons for doing so, and access to culturally relevant mentorship for students and employees. Okay, so that's the main stuff there. So let me turn this off for a moment. Here, so feel free to ask away if you have questions as we go along here, but there's a lot of stuff in there that speaks toward one particular set of values. At the same time, there's also a lot of gobbledygook that is just word salad nonsense at this point. But I would rather we get into the actual report itself. And talk a little bit on that. Here it is. All righty. This is the actual report in here. And all I got to say is, oh boy. We're not going to go through all of this because I'm sure you can tell right at the top. This is 360 pages. There's no way in creation I am going through this whole thing today. Though we'll certainly get into more on locals after the fact and talk a little bit about things going on with that. So if you're sticking around, if you're a supporter on locals, I hope you come join us because that would be fun. There, we'll go do that on locals after the live on YouTube. So yeah, here's actually a little bit more on the hang on a second, let me see if I can't make this a little bit bigger. There we go, that's better. National Academy of Sciences was established in 1863 by an act of Congress signed by President Lincoln as a private non-governmental institution to advise the nation on issues related to science and technology. Members are elected by their peers for outstanding contributions to research. Marcia McNutt is the president. National Academy of Engineering, established in 1964 under the charter of the National Academy of Sciences to bring the practices of engineering to advising the nation. Members are elected by their peers for extraordinary contributions to engineering. So supposedly being elected to the national academies by your colleagues in sciences is a really, really prestigious thing. The National Academy of Medicine, formerly the Institute of Medicine, was established in 1970 under the charter of the National Academy of Sciences to advise the nation on medical and health issues. Members are elected by their peers for distinguished contributions to medicine and health. Dr. Victor Zhao, I don't know how to pronounce his name, so I'm taking a guess. 3 academies work together as the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine to provide independent, objective analysis and advice to the nation and conduct other activities. Hold on a second. I just had a thought related to this line, and to provide independent, objective analysis and advice to the nation and conduct other activities to solve complex problems and inform public policy decisions. The National Academies also encourages education and research outstanding contributions to knowledge and increased public understanding in matters of science, engineering, and medicine. Okay. What just dawned on me as I was reading this is in a lot of the postmodernist thought that forms a lot of DEI things, there is no such thing as objectivity. Objectivity is impossible. And yet the National Academies claims this while posting postmodernist crap at the same time. Forgive me if I'm just like, I don't know how they're gonna how they would reconcile the two. Admittedly, the critique is that people are not perfectly objective. That is a fair critique to point out. But in that paper on positionality pushback, with the authors pushing back on the issue of positionality statements, one of the things they point out is that the intercompetition between different scientists with very different viewpoints on an issue helps to mitigate those particular biases and what ultimately gets us at objective truth. That is the point of such things as the scientific method, and particularly the normative practice of organized skepticism has a lot to do with that. So, but it just dawned on me, wait a second, you're pushing all this stuff that is most demonstrably based on postmodernist thought, and postmodernist thought has a revulsion for objective analysis. And yet the tagline in here is objective analysis and advice. Okay. Just a note. Let's get past the front matter. A lot of names attached to this dang thing. Gilfest patent dispute. No names I immediately recognize, but oh, and I forgot these consensus reports also get reviewed by people. I forgot these consensus reports also get reviewed by people. Oh, you got the DEI board of the American Geophysical Union on the review board. Yeah, forgive me if I don't think this is unbiased. Look at this. The report reflects this report reflects contributions from a number of individuals and groups. Sloan Foundation, Calvi Endowment Fund, Betty Moore Foundation, Heising Simmons Foundation, National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, Cicerone Endowment for NAS Missions, the Rita Allen Foundation, Shanahan, Family Charitable Foundation. There's a lot of these. A lot of these have explicitly very political missions, actually. Here, so that makes me think again. This was not necessarily an objective piece of work. Here, but such as there's a certain conflict of interest there. Committee could not have done its work without the support and guidance of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine project staff. Yeah, of course. Research assistants. Okay. Forgive me if I think they really, really, really are one-sided, because just from the people who supported this, that they just acknowledged, that seems extremely one-sided with respect to the issue. So objective, I kind of doubt it. Let's see. Oh boy. So there's a lot here. Obviously there's no time to get into all of it. Here, lived experiences. If you saw my conversation with Kieran White last month, you would notice you would know full well that I very much dislike the phrase lived experiences, because there is no such thing as there's no such thing as an unlived experience, and the word experience means by definition that it is something that you lived through. You experienced it. You lived through it. Lived experience is a stupid phrase because of that. So I'm just thinking here, what do we do? but there's a crap ton of stuff in this report in here. So I know there's a couple of particular things that I want to get into because they did have a whole section that was particularly interesting on the associated definitions involved, and I think it's in here in this section, but we shall see in here. But I'm immediately skeptical for obvious reasons that that this is, shall we say, objective analysis as they claim to think it is, because it is quite demonstrably seems to be from one side of an issue with this. So I'm not exactly thrilled at the idea of this thing. So I obviously have not read through this in its entirety because, as I said, it's 360 freaking pages. So don't think we're going to get all the way there today. But let's see. Yeah. Oh, I do have an executive summary. Look at that. A very long executive summary. A very long executive summary here, I think. Oh, yes. There we go. That was the definitions I was looking for. So, yeah, here's the summary. Sometimes summaries are just a good thing here. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics and medical organizations in the United States, like all organizations, operate within the broader context of the nation's history, policies, and contemporary societal norms. While the connections between STEM organizations and national context may not seem obvious in day-to-day activities, they are foundational to the culture and climate of educational and professional environments. So, yeah. None of that do I disagree with, actually. None of that do I disagree with. Oh, great. And then they immediately jump into the very politically charged notion here. To address the questions raised by STEM organizations seeking such change, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, Medicine, and Medicine appointed the Committee on Advancing Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in STEM Organizations. Oh boy. The committee was asked to review the research and evidence from lived experience on the ways in which racism at the individual and group level and through conditions that create systemic barriers impede STEM careers for historically minoritized and ethnic groups. I get the feeling there's one large disparity fallacy included here. Identify principles for sustainable change of organizational culture to address racism and promote diversity, equity, inclusion. These might entail the role of training, ways to motivate buy-in at all levels of the STEM organization. Ways to get you to buy into this. Okay. And ways to stay the course in adopting the strategy and goals aimed at addressing racism in its role as a barrier to a STEM career. I get the feeling from reading this is there's one large disparity fallacy involved with it because, the disparity fallacy being the notion that every single disparity between groups in anything is caused by some form of systemic discrimination or discrimination writ large or what have you. Really neatly ripped apart, actually, in Thomas Sowell's book, Discrimination and Disparities. He actually pretty much destroys that fallacy outright. And that was before it was named the disparity fallacy. So that's how old that particular logical fallacy is. At this point, it's probably the proper name, I think, if I remember correctly, is the single cause fallacy. So, I've had a question come to mind, and I think I know what the answer would be. But let's say you eliminate every possible barrier from the system. Go ahead, go do it, because I don't have a problem with that. Everybody should have equal opportunity to succeed. But say you do eliminate all those barriers, and 20 years from now, let's say, there's still, say you eliminate every barrier today, and 20 years from now, there's still some kind of disparities between groups. What does that mean then if you eliminate all the barriers? I think in the postmodernist sense, and if you're so wedded to the idea that systemic discrimination of some form causes every disparity, then you'd say, well, there's something we haven't rooted out yet. So we really haven't gotten rid of all the barriers. That's what makes this an unfalsifiable thesis, is that there's partly is because there's no endpoint. There's no proving it wrong. There's no realization that there's some other thing that may actually be causing that. And again, that's actually nicely ripped apart in Discrimination and Disparities. So the fact that the National Academies of Sciences is writing whole reports that seem to be based on that notion is something interesting. Review and synthesize the existing research on methods to improve recruitment, retention, and advancement of members of historically minoritized racial and ethnic groups pursuing STEM careers, and identifying promising policies and practices for changing existing systems and structures. Identify examples of effective strategies to advance anti-racism in STEM. This is going to be interesting because I don't think they gave a really interesting definition. There's one thing I want to check real quick. Yes, we're still doing well here. Okay, good. Like I said, I was having some technical difficulties with the internet connection before, so we just want to make sure that we're doing well there. Identify examples of effective strategies to advance anti-racism. Yeah, we're going to get to that in a second. What the heck is those definitions? Define a research agenda to address gaps in knowledge in the evidence base to advance Here's my concern with something like that. I don't have a problem with doing research on all these topics. I absolutely do not have a problem with that in the slightest. But if it is so based on that disparity fallacy and so blind to the multidimensional nature of what diversity is, not to mention the many other things that influences a person's decision to do something, then it's going to be immediately a biased piece of research, or at least that would be my thought on how that would work. So this is defining that research agenda. I think that's going to be one of the things that go find is what the heck is that research agenda that they have in here. So if you want to follow along in this report and you just joined us, it did just occur to me. I think I did put the link to the report itself in the description of the video. So if you want to follow along with that, I suggest you click on that and go look at the thing. Although I think, actually, I think you can't, because I think this report itself is behind a subscription wall. So I will do my best for locals folks to make this available to folks on locals if they want to go read it themselves in its full glory. So to address the statement of the task, the National Academies appointed the committee, including experts in this. What the hell? What? Did anybody know there's apparently a science of anti-racism? This is a new one on me. I didn't know that was the thing. Science of anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm sorry, but I don't find that to be a science, because one of the assumptions you have to make there is a certain amount of things that are fundamentally unfalsifiable thesis, which makes it very anti-scientific. Not to mention a lot of the DEI stuff with postmodernism, as I said previously, doesn't like objectivity, doesn't think objectivity can exist, doesn't think that you can make an objective judgment, that everything's subjective and political, and whomever's in power determines what the truth is. Science of I'm gonna have to go look that up for myself just to satisfy my curiosity. Social and cognitive psychology, industrial and organizational psychology, sociology, and individuals with experience implementing programs in STEM organizations. Okay. Challenges experienced by minoritized people in STEM are deeply rooted in history, law, culture, and institutional practices, and interpersonal biases and assumptions, all factors that must be understood in depth to discern ways forward. At the same time, it is important to recognize that while there may be some shared experiences, these socio-cultural factors for different minorities Okay. Wait a second. These socio-cultural factors differ for minoritized groups and individuals. Differ for different minoritized groups and individuals, precluding a one-size-fits-all solution. Interesting. Thus, the committee elected to focus on the challenges facing Black Americans to STEM in STEM to demonstrate the inquiry that is required, noting the prominence of work on this topic both within the academies and in the broader research community. This focus is in no way intended to diminish the importance of addressing challenges facing other minoritized groups, but rather meant to provide guidance for future work to address their concerns, including a call for additional research that investigates the uniquely racialized issues facing these groups in the research agenda to the extent that information about Indigenous Latin, they dropped the Latinx thing. Here in this report, the committee elected to use the gender-neutral Latin rather than Latinos, Latinas, or Latinx. Latin is a term created by gender non-binary and feminist communities in Spanish-speaking countries. The objective of the term is also to remove gender from Spanish by replacing it with the gender-neutral Spanish letter E, which can already be found. In other words, okay. Goodness. Okay. I mean, Latinx was pretty bad. And it was, last I checked on the polling, most Hispanic folks didn't like it, or even know what the heck it was. So Latin, although that may not be the right pronunciation, but whatever. Asian American and people from other minoritized groups exist in scientific literature. It is included in part of the evidence base of this report. So their focus was on one group, but I'm going to make a point here. They actually say it, and at the same time, they utterly ignore it. Oh, come on. Socioculture factors differ for different minoritized groups and individuals. Is that their way of admitting that everybody from a particular group doesn't have the same experiences? Because I know from the table of contents, they went on to say, to just start interviewing people about their experiences in academia and in sciences. And presuming that seems to be representative of everybody of that group. And at the same time, differ for different minoritized groups and individuals. One of the, yeah, this, goodness. Let's see. To address its charge to review evidence from lifting. I'm just going to read that again and substitute in the correct phrase. To address its charge to review evidence from experience on the ways in which racism impedes STEM careers for historically minoritized and ethnic groups, the committee leveraged the expertise from the National Academy's Roundtable on Black Men and Black Women in STEM. A panel of leaders focused on increasing the representation, retention, and inclusion of Black men and women in science, engineering, and medicine. Structured interviews with members of the Roundtable and other members of the National Academies who identify as Black or African American can critically contribute to and complement the body of published and peer-reviewed research evidence on anti-racism, diversity, and equity and inclusion in STEM facing Black Americans, and is intended to provide important accounts that illustrate not only the challenges these professionals face, but also the support that they found helpful in their career. Does the National Academies presume that these interviews are representative of all people of particular? When they do these interviews, do they presume that that's representative of all the people of that group in science? That's a question. That's an honest question that I have with this. Let's see. Here we go. To carry out its work systematically, the committee agreed upon definitions that reflect the disciplinary research and committee deliberations. Anti-racism is an active, intentional, and dynamic set of actions that dismantle and disrupt racism, which is the combination of policies, practices, attitudes, cultures, and systems that affect individuals, institutions, and structures unequally, that confer power and privilege on certain groups over others, defined according to social constructions of race and ethnicity. Okay. This is a very postmodern definition because it's all about power and privilege, and the dialectic and what have you, here. But the other thing, this was actually a great thing that was pointed out in that positionality paper that it did earlier this week. One of the things that was pointed out in that, you can keep in mind, hang on a second. If you're talking about social construction of race, is it possible that the social construction of race is different across the different societies and cultures across the world. And when you're talking about sciences in the United States, you are mixing an awful lot of cultures into this country. Um, Totally fine, but let's acknowledge that different cultures across the world perhaps don't have the same social construction of race and ethnicity, right? Let's see. This is where I get annoyed because I do remember reading this. This one part I made it to. Diversity is the fair representation of different aspects of human characteristics, identities, and perspectives in the composition of a group. Diversity is contextual and benefits from specific definitions for the areas to which it applies rather. It can be product of anti-racist actions as well as a measure against racism. What's a fair representation? Nowhere is that defined. At least from what I could find, nowhere is that defined. What the hell is a fair representation? Um, Different aspects of human characteristics. Okay, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of things by which people differ from each other. And those things kind of inform their perspectives. I can't stand the notion of identities, frankly. I don't There's a singular identity that I have, and it's all encompassed in my name. Um, that's the way I view that. Thank you very much. Um, Diversity is contextual and benefits from specific definitions for the areas to which it applies. In other words, this definition can be completely different in some other thing over here. It's completely fungible. There's no specificity in here at all. That's just crazy because you have no definition of what fair representation means in all of this. And because you have that no definition of that, let me go back to the question I asked. If you removed every barrier, which fine, go ahead, remove every barrier. Make sure everybody has the opportunity to succeed, opportunity to try in different disciplines, what have you. And the disparities between groups still exist 20 years from now. What would you do? What would you do? Would you go back and reevaluate whether or not your approach was correct? Whether or not your theory and your physical thinking about this were correct? Or would you just continue to scream that there's still barriers, that there must still be barriers we haven't figured out what they are, and that and we're gonna get rid of them and all this? My guess is if the postmodernists would be, you'd still be screaming that the sky is falling, essentially. But good grief, no definition of what fair is. And I've seen other definitions that basically just define the human characteristics part of this as just being race, sex, gender, what have you, which go back to Bernard Hommel with that one, the blindness to the multidimensional nature of diversity. So I immediately find this to be a gobbledygook definition that they wrote this report off of. Equity. Equity is an outcome from fair conditions, policies, practices, structures, cultures, and norms. What the heck is fair conditions? In which all individuals and groups have the opportunities and the resources they need for general well-being or success in specific metrics, such as pay or advancement. Equity is aligned with justice and may require the systemic come right out and say it, systemic redistribution of power, access, and resources. Equity should not be confused with equality, which is the treatment of individuals in the same manner regardless of their starting point. Okay. That's basically to say equality of outcomes. That's what they're after with this. Is basically what I get out of it, just reading it, is seems to be very much equality of outcome. Which, again, the notion of equality of outcome is drawn from, Thomas Sowell lays this out very well in Discrimination and Disparities, which is why I recommend reading it. There's a notion that absent discrimination, absent societal discrimination, everybody would have the same outcome. Everybody would be successful. That's not true. Failure is actually the norm here. In all of human history, failure has been the norm, not success. And so part of this equity thing is drawn from that flaw of thinking that everybody's going to be successful barring discrimination. That's not true. There's so many other things that affect whether or not somebody is successful at something, whether or not everybody has the same outcome. And it's not just the resources. Let us say for a moment that everybody has the same opportunity, the same resources. In the notion of equity, everybody would be successful, right? Everybody would be successful. Everybody would have the job that they want, all this other kind of stuff. That's not what happens. Because what if you in temperament and personality, for individuals, mind you, what if you in temperament and personality are, hardworking, hardworking, get shit done, all the kinds of things of actually wanting to work on stuff. You go to the nth degree, you put in 120% every single day, you show up and do stuff. You have the same opportunity and the same resources as somebody else who is wildly lazy. Do you think those two people are going to have the same outcome? There's so many other things that affected not just opportunity and the resources to succeed. And what they're talking about here with the fair conditions thing is the notion that you should be able to succeed here. You should have the same outcome as everybody else. You should have the same outcome as everybody else is what I'm getting out of this. Oh goodness. And frankly, with science, if every individual scientist is having the same outcome, you're putting people on the same platform if they're shitty at being a scientist as well as they're being you're putting the great scientists on the same platform with the shitty ones if you're looking for an equal outcome with respect to scientific research. Yeah. I would rather have equality. Thank you very much. Now, is this not to say that we shouldn't, as university folks, is this not to say that people shouldn't be aiding folks who need help with different resources and what have you? No, of course not. Of course not. That's not what it's saying. For an individual who comes in and they need assistance writing a grant or something like that, yeah, no, there's different university things and plenty of resources to be able to do that, to get the help that someone needs to get something written for a given individual when they need help for on that individual basis. You need help with something, there's resources there for it. There really truthfully is already. But yeah, presuming that even if you give everybody the same resources, you're going to get the same outcome is wildly unrealistic and doesn't seem to take a good look at what's going on in society, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, inclusion is the feeling or sense of belonging in an environment where all individuals, regardless of and with respect to their backgrounds, feel that they have a voice and support for full participation in that environment. An inclusive culture, reinforced with equitable policies, practices, programs, and structures, an inclusive culture is reinforced with that. Yeah, sorry. In an inclusive environment, leaders take an active role in reflecting, learning, and listening to all members of the community to sustain a culture of dignity, respect, and trust. Okay. I'm going to remind again here, we talked about this with respect to psychology. There's not really a solid thing in psychology what belonging actually is. So, here with this, and this all sounds nice, and yeah, though I would also point out, like, the Latin, the origins, the etymology of the word inclusion comes from the Latin includere, which, if you're actually translating it to be precise to English, actually means to confine or to imprison. But anyway, that's a fun tangential thing here. Yeah, ideally, you want to feel included in something. That is a natural kind of feeling that a lot of humans have, is to want to belong to a group. Great discussion of this actually in Jonathan Rauch's The Constitution of Knowledge, which I do recommend reading also. It is an excellent book when you're talking about that kind of feeling and how that can actually cause problems when you're trying to get to knowledge-based and have a reality-based community. So these are the definitions that they used. Notice that for all the saying of fair conditions and fair representation, there's no definition here of what fair actually is in this. So let's see. So this is all from the summary. Do-do-do-do. So let's see. Just trying to think of what else is going on here. Welcome in, folks. If you have any thoughts or questions as to what's going on here, you're welcome to ask away on this particular thing. Let's see. Let's see. To understand the relative persistence of students in STEM higher education, data collection organizations such as the National Centers for Science and Engineering Statistics and the National Center for Education Statistics should collect and share online with the public information on the demographics of students entering college, planning to study STEM and their subsequent educational outcomes disaggregated by race and ethnicity, gender, and field of study, including how many complete a STEM degree, how many switch to complete a non-STEM degree, and how many leave college without a degree. Understanding lived experience and other ways of knowing. So there's this whole chapter where they talk about the lived experiences here, or should we just say the experiences? Because you all know how I think about the lived experiences nonsense. Oral history and other means of exploring the lived experience of scholars from historically and systemically minoritized groups in STEM offer valuable insights that supplement findings from other kinds of research. Methods should be continued and expanded. I don't actually have a problem with the notion of doing interviews with different people in STEM, frankly, to see what their experiences have been like, particularly since academia has an interesting culture right now. Here's the thing: is that I get really concerned about these interviews and when they are used and really represent a small group of people and the voices of that small group of people being used to represent entire groups and demographic groups of people, when that's probably not really representative. This is where the problem of thinking about people in groups comes in, is that if you start assuming that the experiences of one group of people are reflective of the whole, I question whether or not that's an actually good way to go about doing it. Let's see. There are a few noteworthy ways to describe how people from historically and systemically minoritized groups respond to racism in STEM fields. Let's see. Leaders and gatekeepers. Improve diversity through. Wait, what? Determine if the institutional diversity statement reflects the reality. Okay, so these are actual like formal odd conclusions that they recommended. Recommendations rather, excuse me. Hire more minorities individuals, especially in positions where role models are missing, with the aim of building critical mass. Okay. This is something that I wanted to something that I talked about with my local supporters, actually, because I've seen this commentary all the time. You see this comment. We need to see people who look like me to succeed. You know, as a woman, you need to see more women in STEM to feel like you belong there. You need to see more of X for me, who's in X group, to feel like I belong there. And I've been thinking about that, and I see it in here. And let us ask the question then: is how shallow is that? In that you have to see somebody who looks like you to feel welcome. Well, hold on a second. Don't you connect better with a person if they share your values about something? If they are, you know, maybe you share a like over, oh, I don't know, maybe you both like cats, maybe you both like dogs, any number of different things. Isn't that more and deeper of a connection to make you feel welcome than seeing somebody who looks like you? There's a reason I have a dislike of that phrase, and I'm seeing it in here, that you have to see someone who looks like you to feel welcome. Well, no, you can have a couple of different options in this, right? You can have folks who look like you, yes, but you don't have anything that you connect on in terms of your values and your beliefs or your worldviews. You have no common interest in pursuing the truth, let's say, or you different competing values and other things, and so you end up disconnected from each other. And you find yourself unwelcome in a group, maybe because your values don't line up with the values of that other group of people, and they could all look exactly the same. At the same time, you could also have people who look completely different from each other and have shared values, and they end up connecting and feeling more of a sense of being welcome in a group, which is something that humans do seek for. um so that's why I find the thing of everybody has to look like me for me to feel welcome. There has to be people that look like me for me to feel welcome in a discipline, is just really shallow, actually, when you start thinking about it. Absolutely. No, no, no. I'm absolutely with this. Just hire to the nth degree, whomever. But why are we inculcating the notion that you have to look like someone to feel welcome with that group, or someone has to look like you in that group to feel welcome in that group? That's a very it's a very shallow kind of thing. I don't think it necessarily helps anything. If you're talking about improving improving diversity as they define it here, with different races, race, sex, gender orientation, all that in a discipline. um I actually feel that builds a barrier between people. It doesn't break down a barrier between people. Yeah, Rick, that's a great comment there. I see it. For example, if we have to have a variety of races on a jury in order to reach a just verdict, then we have a deeper problem. We don't, of course. Yeah. Um and that's a good point, because there's I think Eric Smith has talked about this with Free Black Thought. He talked about the fact that how he had to point out to deans and folks that he's worked with that, hey, no, not everybody of a particular race thinks the same way. Not everybody of a particular race has the same experiences. Not everybody of a particular race has the same values. You can probably have more variety amongst people within groups than between groups. In a lot of cases, and particularly in the United States. So that's a very interesting point, and I don't think it's going to help making bringing more people into STEM and getting more groups to want to work with each other, because we already talked about it, the DEI trainings and what have you, and some of it I think they proposed in here, if I remember correctly, tended to have the opposite problem, where it actually made people less likely to want to work with each other, because they structured them as in this thing of, you know, privileged and marginalized and what have you, and I'm a victim, and all the thing about microaggressions. The microaggression stuff is really fascinating in and of itself, and it does absolutely make sense that you'd see this result, that, when you get into microaggressions training, people have a tendency to work with people from other backgrounds or the demographic groups less if they have gone through these things, because you've inadvertently created the stereotype that people from different groups are fragile. So why should I work with them? I'm afraid I'm going to offend somebody. Um, People don't naturally go out looking to offend people. I don't think necessarily, but so it's really interesting. So here's the fun question I would take from this is, like, you know, we have more variety among people, and this goes back to the thing, like Bernard Hummel, the positionality pushback kind of thing, and all this have started pointing this out, and thank goodness they're seeing some pushback on all this stuff in the literature, actually, in the scientific literature, because you all may not see it in the news and things like that, but when you're starting to see different groups push back and do published articles in peer review, which is where scientists primarily communicate with each other on these different things, you're actually starting to see it, which is awesome. But they all are starting to point out, wait a second, there's like hundreds of freaking things that make people that make people who they are, essentially. It's like, okay, yes, you have race, sex, gender, religion, political orientation, your worldview, your socioeconomic background of where you grew up, the kind of cultural background you grew up in, what your parents were like at home, but what's your learning style, instance, what's your cognitive style, do you have any disabilities, all these different things. It shows up in Bernard Hammel's paper, the preprint from the Fiedler on the Roof fiasco. Um, and yet, when you get to the point where you're just breaking people down in groups like this, you're seriously ignoring that. And it's why I wonder I wonder because if you look at some of the research papers with the DEI stuff and, whether people think certain things are microaggression or what have you, you can end up with almost 50-50. And yet in some cases it's still reported like, oh, this is an awful thing to say. Um, but yet it's like 50-50 from the people who are supposed to be offended by it. It's like, it's offensive, or no, it's not, or yeah, that's really offensive. So, that really speaks to the variety of individuals, not to this nonsense of the of every group having to look like that. No, obviously, yes, hire folks for every group. Make sure that I would like to see actually more representation myself from various different groups, if only because Bernard Hummel actually puts this very well. It's like, yeah, diversity has a good case for it in the sense that if we all thought the same from an evolutionary perspective, we wouldn't last long. So he's not wrong about that, Bernard Hummel, but in the same breath, I wouldn't presume that people of different groups all think the same and have all the same experiences either. Anyway, that's just been something that's been on my mind. Let's see. So there's a lot to this bloody report. Affirmations of kindness? What is that? So there's a lot of recommendations here following the leveraging. So let's see. Leaders and gatekeepers, higher education, create and provide continued investments in evidence-based programs that connect minoritized individuals to in-group peers. To in-group peers. Wait a second. There's nothing. I don't necessarily have a problem with that in the sense that it's totally fine to connect people with different races, but just connect people to peers. Period. Like I said, it seems somewhat shallow to build relationships based to focus on what people have in common on a skin. Well, how do I put this? It seems somewhat shallow. Let's put it that way. Institutional resources and professional networks, these investments may require significant expertise in their designs and execution, and they may not yield immediate results. However, they could increase a sense of welcome and belonging, through the ability to connect with individuals from similar racial and ethnic backgrounds. Yeah, I mean, that is a form of connection. Just don't presume that everybody from that racial or ethnic background has the same experiences. Types of programs, we have the following. Summer Bridge. Okay. Actively work to form relationships with national level affinity societies. Create local chapters and provide opportunities for minorities and individuals to connect with them. Okay. Looking to see, because I haven't read all this all the way through myself, but I don't want to spend. I unfortunately can't spend all day with this because I do have to do my errands and grocery shopping and all that kind of jazz at some point today. But oh boy. Leaders and gatekeepers of STEM organizations, higher education, and human resource officers can improve minority groups' individual and interpersonal experiences in STEM educational and professional environments through the following practices. Develop interpersonal environments and institutional norms that promote inclusion, dignity, and belonging, and affirmations of kindness. Affirmations of kindness. I wonder what the heck that is. Yeah, I see what you're saying, Rick. It can be they can claim race doesn't exist, and I don't know if you were here when I said it before, but let's see. Bernard Hummel makes a good point, actually. I keep going back to this paper because he made so many good points. Think about it. If race is a social construct, then you cannot presume that different societies and cultures around the world have the same construct of races as the United States does. So that's a fun aspect there for sure. Let's see. Actively recognize minoritized individuals' contributions to STEM across multiple mediums such as portraits, media stories, awards. Decenter white professional norms in culture, dress, and appearance. What the heck is a white professional norm? Seriously, what the heck is a white professional norm? I don't even know what that is. Conduct additional research examining features of the physical environment that are most likely to promote sustainable ADEI, which is accessibility, by the way, is the first word. Emphasize and recognize the importance of communal values in STEM work. Don't we have a bunch of those already? We have a bunch of normative principles that we share as scientists. What is it? Kudos. Communality. Research belongs to all. Universalism. Anybody can do science. Disinterestedness. That the only thing we should be zealously pursuing is the truth. And organized skepticism, which is that rigorous pushback and back and forth on things. We already have a bunch of those. Maybe you should emphasize those. Just a thing. Redesign STEM curriculum to incorporate indigenous ways of knowing and involve indigenous communities in the development of this process. Create cultural norms that communicate the strengths and struggles of minoritized groups. Provide access to culturally responsive mental health providers or resources with experience in addressing racial stress, trauma, and aggressions for minoritized individuals who've experienced distress and will pursue these options. Conduct biannual cultural audits to determine if an institution is fostering an environment of inclusion. I'm guessing a lot of this is not necessarily going to do that, to be honest. Let's see. Addressing individual bias and persistent inequality. Okay, this ought to be fun. So this is all recommendations off of this report from the National Academies of Sciences, Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, on what they want to see happen in STEM organizations. And for those of you who may have missed it, the last M in STEM in this case is medicine. Let's see. Conclusion 6.1. Like other people, gatekeepers have attitudinal biases. That means individuals, including gatekeepers, may not be able to monitor their own biases impartially and may unwittingly perpetuate it. Right. Leaders of STEM organizations and directors of human resource officers can improve minorities, individuals. Okay. Create organizational level, unit level information systems to collect data on the decisions of gatekeepers. Data collected may include, but not be limited to, hiring, admissions, promotion, tenure, advancement, and awards. Data should be examined to aggregate, in the aggregate rather, to identify patterns of bias exhibited by gatekeepers based on race and ethnicity. Here's something I'm wondering. With the push for this, there are certainly people who are not going to like this stuff being broken down by race and what have you, because some folks do find it dehumanizing to be broken down that way, to be considered as a member of a group rather than our unique individual selves and identity. One of the reasons I dislike this stuff immensely is because it does that. Here it really ignores the many things that make an individual who they are. So if you have these things, and I saw it a few times starting to pop up on Twitter, so this is anecdotal. So I would be curious to see if there's actually somebody who's going to do the study on this. How many people are going to lie? Because a lot of times with those surveys, there's the prefer not to answer option. So I am curious how many people are going to just start lying about what demographic groups they're part of, or if they're even a part of one, because of this stuff like this, where they're just demanding to know it. Demanding to have data. And the data thing is a presumption here that disparity is caused by discrimination, which again is a logical fallacy. It seems to be quite prevalent, unfortunately, in this. So yeah, I do wonder that. Do you think folks are going to lie when they have the opportunity on these surveys now, when this demographic information is being collected? As I can tell you that I have actually. I was actually completing a survey, and there was all this demographic stuff at the end, and I basically decided not to fill it out. I gave pretty much I prefer not to answer for everything. I don't like doing that, but at the same time, I don't view myself as a member of a group. I view myself as an individual. I view other people as individuals. This kind of way of thinking about it for all the talk of diversity with respect to human characteristics and what have you that this report has, approaching it in this manner doesn't account for the fact that in one vein of diversity of thought, there are folks who do not think of themselves as groups and refuse to think of themselves as a member of a group, but like to think of themselves as individuals here and other people as individuals. But this kind of thinking doesn't necessarily allow for that as much, which one could say that's exclusive. Hmm. Include responsibilities related to advancing anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion in leadership role and descriptions and requirements for advancement into management. Okay. There's your mandatory DEI statements kind of thing, which if you notice John Saylor's work, there's been a lot of pushback in actually getting a bunch of those DEI statements revoked. Like the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill Board of Regents actually basically said, no, we're not going to allow DEI statements anymore, which is the right thing, actually. You do not have the right to dictate what a person believes, and you do not have the right to dictate that they should do something specific to a particular set of values that you may or may not share, that is not necessarily related to the position in question. So this would seem that they want the opposite. Develop systems with more widely shared, inclusive decision-making processes and shared authority over the allocation of resources, which should limit the negative consequences that occur when gatekeeping is concentrated in a select few individuals. You realize how long making a decision by committee takes? You realize how long making a decision by committee actually really takes? It's actually pretty crazy. And when you need to make a decision, you're in a time crunch on a deadline. Making a decision by committee with shared authority in these things, that's not productive to getting stuff done. There are points where you do want to have committees decisions over things. Yes, that's important, but that doesn't necessarily help if you're really on a tight deadline. Let's see. Conclusion 7.1 for teams in STEM organizations. Increasing numeric representation of minoritized individuals is critical. However, numeric diversity alone is insufficient to yield positive team performance. Conditions that foster inclusion are also essential. Increase representation. Okay. Create team norms that centralize a positive climate in which it is known that all team members are supported, heard, and respected. You would that all sounds good in theory. Let's put it that way. That all sounds good. Develop interdependent teams in which everyone is cooperating and working toward an established common goal. Ensure team members feel psychologically safe, and if not, the specific factors that prevent psychological safety and work to address them. Work to promote equal status among team members. Remove asymmetric power among team members, especially between white team members and minoritized team members. Oh my gosh. That's what comes in when you're not thinking of folks as individuals. Let's see. Incorporate greater diversity in developing team roles and make sure all team members have clear roles and expectations, including access to professional pathways. Okay. So there's a lot of wild stuff in here. Yeah, and this is just immediately suspect here. Recognize the problem. Do you understand the people most impacted? Analyze the impact. Organizational analysis should be both quantitative and qualitative. Address leaders who are resistant to change. Assist people in feeling part of the change. Yeah. In other words, you will do this. You will do this. Good freaking grief. Now, so I unfortunately have to wrap up here shortly because I do need to actually take care of a few things, and I want to get the locals live stream in before I have to go take care of that. So, for those of you who are interested, of course, I will actually put this report in locals for my locals supporters and members, so that they can have a good look at this particular PDF in here. And I encourage you to go read it. I encourage you to go have a look at it in full. But I'm skeptical as to whether or not this is going to help, because it seems, despite saying somewhere early on in this thing that that this is not necessarily reflective of all the experiences of all individuals. They're making it be all about groups. And frankly, that does not seem, according to the literature, to be very successful. They're also seemingly after having certain things, and you're going to make change and all this, and pushing it that way. Frankly, I don't think it's very inclusive to divergent viewpoints, and it's not really inclusive at all of the vast variability, shall we say, of human thoughts. Sure, thanks, Rick. Thank you for coming by here, and hopefully I'll be back next month with another SciChat Saturday. But next month I'm going to be traveling a lot, so we shall see how that goes. But yeah, I encourage you to go on and read this more. But my kind of assessment, reading through it as much as I did, is that this is not going to do much good. I don't think this kind of approach isn't going to do much good, because it's still based around treating people as groups and not treating people as individuals and the actual variety of human behavior. It's based on a lot of postmodernist dribble too, for that matter, which, funny enough, as I said, postmodernist dribble really has a dislike of objectivity. And yet, let me go down here to this: provide independent, objective analysis and advice to the nation and conduct other activities. So there seems to be something of a conflict here, because the postmodernist stuff is decidedly not about objectivity. Alrighty, folks, I'm going to sign off. If you're a local supporter, come on over to Locals, and we'll do a brief stream over there to wrap up and give some additional thoughts. Check this out on the replay if you came in late, and all that jazz. Until next time, thank you all for stopping by. I'm Adrian. May you all stay curious.